It was a Thursday evening when everything I thought I knew about love started to unravel. I remember because the light outside was that strange golden kind, the one that makes even ordinary moments feel like something worth keeping. I was in the kitchen stirring soup, the radio humming softly behind me, and for a second, life felt exactly as it should, quiet, simple, safe. I was 34, married for 9 years to a man I believed was my anchor. His name was Adam, and for most of our marriage, I thought I knew every rhythm of his world, the way his voice softened when he was tired, the faint scent of cedar cologne he left behind on the pillow, the gentle weight of his hand over mine when we watched TV together. We weren't perfect, but we were real, or at least I thought we were. That night, his phone was on the counter, something he rarely did. Usually it stayed in his jacket pocket, always within reach. I didn't mean to look. I wasn't the kind of wife who snooped, not because I was noble, but because I trusted him. Blindly, maybe foolishly, but completely. The phone buzzed once, then again. I turned my head and saw her name flash on the screen. Just a first name, Clara. Something about the simplicity of it made my stomach twist. The message preview showed only a few words. Can't wait for tonight. Same table. The spoon slipped from my hand and clattered into the sink. I stood there staring at the phone as the warmth of the kitchen drained away. My chest tightened and I suddenly felt like I was watching my own life through a glass wall. Another message came through seconds later, 7 p.m. I'll wear the red dress you like. My heart sank so hard I could almost hear it hit the floor. There are moments when the world doesn't just shift, it fractures. You don't scream, you don't cry. You just stand there in silence listening to the echo of something breaking inside you. That was me, standing barefoot on the cold tile floor holding a wooden spoon watching my marriage crumble one text at a time. When he came home later that evening, he smiled like everything was normal, kissed my forehead, told me work had been long and stressful. I nodded, pretending not to notice that his cologne smelled stronger than usual, or that he avoided my eyes when I asked about his plans for tomorrow. He said he'd be working late again. I smiled and said, of course. But inside, something had already shifted. The woman who trusted without question had died quietly in that kitchen. In her place stood someone else, calmer, colder, and far more dangerous. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside him, listening to the slow rhythm of his breathing. My eyes traced the ceiling as thoughts spun like a storm. How long? Who was she? Did he love her? Did he ever love me? Every inhale he took felt like a lie. Every exhale a confession he didn't have the courage to speak aloud. Around 2 a.m., I got up and went to the living room. The city was silent outside, streetlights casting long shadows across the floor. I sat there in the dark, clutching his phone, the one I'd quietly taken from the nightstand after he fell asleep. His passcode hadn't changed. That somehow hurt the most. It wasn't the first time they'd talked. I scrolled back through weeks of messages, late-night jokes, secret plans, photos, and long threads that read like stolen moments from a romance I didn't belong in. She wasn't just some stranger. She knew things. She mentioned his favorite wine, his grandmother's birthday, the new project he'd been stressing over. This wasn't an affair that had just started. It was one that had roots, and that realization cut deeper than anything else. By 3 a.m. I stopped reading, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't breathe. The messages blurred into one endless betrayal. I dropped the phone onto the couch, pressed my palms over my face, and let out a sound I didn't recognize, somewhere between a sob and a laugh. I thought about waking him, shaking him, screaming every word I'd just read. But something in me stopped. He didn't deserve my rage, not yet. If he could plan a secret dinner, then so could I. The next morning I called the restaurant, the same one they had reserved, a quiet little place near the river that we used to go to years ago on anniversaries. I still remembered the table number. I'd chosen it once myself, back when love still felt like something sacred. When the hostess answered, I said calmly, I'd like to reserve table 7 for 2, please. Right next to table 6. She paused. That's an interesting request. I smiled. You could say that. By the time I hung up, I had already planned everything. The dress I would wear, a deep emerald green one he'd once said made me look unforgettable. The jewelry, the same necklace from our wedding night. The timing perfect enough to watch his expression change when he realized what I'd done. But more than that, I planned my composure. Because revenge, I realized, isn't about shouting or tears. It's about silence that suffocates the guilty. That day, I went through the motions of routine like an actress rehearsing a role. I smiled at my coworkers. I bought groceries. I made polite small talk with the cashier who asked how my week was going. Inside, though, every word I spoke was a performance. Beneath my skin, a war was raging grief, rage, humiliation, all fighting for control. But I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. When evening came, I dressed slowly, deliberately. My hands trembled only once when I applied lipstick and caught my reflection in the mirror. For a moment, I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. Her eyes weren't soft anymore, they were sharp, focused, cold. As I fastened the necklace, I whispered to myself, he chose the wrong woman to betray. By 6:45, I was sitting alone at table 7, one table away from his reservation. I had arrived early, ordered a glass of wine, and positioned myself with a perfect view of the entrance. The restaurant glowed with low amber light. Couples whispered over plates of pasta and wine. The air smelled faintly of rosemary and candle wax. The violinist in the corner played something soft and nostalgic, cruelly romantic. Every sound felt amplified, the clink of glasses, the hush of footsteps. My pulse echoed louder than the music. At exactly 7 p.m. he arrived. He looked handsome, too handsome for a man I could barely stand to look at. He wore the navy suit I had given him for his last birthday. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on table 6, where she sat waiting wearing that same red dress she had promised in her text. He smiled at her, the same smile that used to belong to me. And I smiled too, but for a very different reason. The moment he pulled out her chair and sat across from her, I turned slightly just enough for him to catch the shimmer of my necklace. He froze. For a second, he didn't move. His expression flickered confusion, shock, fear, all bleeding into one. She looked at him puzzled. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer. I lifted my wine glass slowly, met his gaze, and mouthed a single word across the room. "Enjoy." He didn't blink. For a full 5 seconds, the man I had once called my husband sat there frozen like a ghost, realizing it was already dead. I watched the color drain from his face as his hand tightened around the edge of the tablecloth. His mistress Clara, the woman in the red dress, tilted her head in confusion, whispering something I couldn't hear. I didn't need to. Her voice was light, playful, the kind of voice that still believed in the illusion of being special. I had used that same tone once years ago when I still believed I was his one and only. He finally blinked, forcing a small, nervous laugh as he looked away, pretending he hadn't just locked eyes with the very woman whose life he had shattered. But I could see the tremor in his hand when he reached for the wine glass. His reflection in the glass betrayed him, a man cornered by his own lies. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my posture calm, and collected the way a queen might observe a peasant caught stealing from her throne room. There was no shouting, no public scene, just silence that burned hotter than any fire. The waiter came to refill my glass. He smiled politely, but I caught the flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He must have sensed something, the strange energy that hums between people when secrets are being ripped open in plain sight. "Everything okay, ma'am?" he asked softly. I smiled faintly. "Perfect," I said. "Absolutely perfect." I lifted the glass and sipped, never breaking eye contact with my husband. It wasn't about humiliation anymore. It was about exposure, about holding up a mirror and letting him drown in his reflection. He tried to speak to her again, tried to act normal, but his voice cracked. She noticed, of course. Her perfectly painted smile began to falter. Her eyes darted toward me, probably wondering why the stranger in green across the aisle was staring so intently. It didn't take her long to realize who I was. I saw it happen. The flicker of recognition in her face. The subtle widening of her eyes. The way her shoulders stiffened as if someone had poured ice water down her spine. She looked back at him and I could almost hear her whisper, "Is that your wife?" He didn't nod. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. I finished my wine, placed the glass down carefully, and smiled at them both. Not the smile of a victim, but the smile of a woman who had already won a war they didn't even know had begun. Then I stood. Every step I took toward their table echoed across the restaurant. The violinist kept playing, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the soft melody. As I approached, the conversation around us seemed to fade. The air thickened. Even the waiter near the kitchen slowed his steps, as if sensing the weight of the moment. When I reached their table, she opened her mouth to say something, maybe an apology, maybe a lie. I didn't give her the chance. I rested my hand gently on the back of the empty chair beside them. Beautiful restaurant, I said softly. I see you two have good taste. Her lips parted in shock. My husband's face turned red, then pale again. What are you doing here? He stammered. I smiled, tilting my head. Oh, I just wanted to see the table you reserved for your meeting. It's lovely, almost nostalgic. He swallowed hard. It's not what you think. I cut him off with a calm, almost amused tone. Oh, please, don't insult me with cheap lines. You think I didn't read your messages, the red dress, the same table, how poetic. Clara looked down, cheeks burning. I could see shame starting to settle in, but I didn't pity her. Not tonight. I'm not here to fight, I continued. I'm here to make sure you both remember this moment. Because you'll think of it every time you see each other again. This exact table, these exact candles, the woman you betrayed watching you both squirm under the weight of your choices. The waiter hovered nearby, uncertain whether to step in. I gave him a reassuring nod and whispered, Everything's fine. Just a misunderstanding being cleared up. He nodded and slipped away, though not before glancing at my husband with quiet judgment. I looked at Clara, then really looked at her. She was beautiful in the fragile, glossy way of women who mistake attention for affection. But under the restaurant's soft lighting, I could see something else fear. You know, I said softly, I almost envy you. She blinked, startled. You gotta meet the man he really is without the mask. It took me 9 years to see it. Her eyes flickered with guilt, but I continued before she could respond. You'll learn soon enough that a man who cheats with you will eventually cheat on you. He doesn't love you. He loves how you make him forget who he really is. I turned to him. His lips parted as if to defend himself, but the truth had already cornered him. He looked smaller now, diminished. You could have told me, I said. My voice trembled just slightly, the first crack in my armor. You could have looked me in the eyes and ended it. But you didn't. You wanted to play both sides. You wanted the safety of my love and the thrill of her admiration. He stared down at his plate, silent. For a moment, the silence stretched too long, heavy with everything unsaid. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, but I stood tall. Then I smiled again, that calm, steady smile that terrified him more than any scream could. Well, I said lightly, I suppose dinner's ruined. But at least you've got dessert, the taste of guilt. It's rich, isn't it? I leaned down just close enough for only him to hear. By the way, I canceled our joint account this morning. Enjoy paying for dinner. And then I left. The sound of my heels clicking against the floor echoed through the restaurant like a drumbeat of liberation. When I reached the door, I paused for a split second and glanced back just once. He was sitting there, hands shaking, staring at the untouched plate in front of him. Clara looked like she wanted to disappear. The candle between them flickered, casting warped shadows across their faces. Two people who had mistaken deceit for love. I stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered against the river, and the sound of distant laughter drifted through the streets. I stood there for a long moment, breathing it in, the bittersweet scent of freedom. The tears didn't come, not yet. What filled me instead was a strange calm, the kind that comes when a storm has passed, and all that's left is silence. I walked to my car and sat there staring at the restaurant window. I could still see them, silhouettes in flickering candlelight, a portrait of guilt. I whispered to myself, let them eat in peace, they'll choke on it later. When I turned on the ignition, my reflection appeared faintly in the rearview mirror, the same face but older now, wiser, harder. The woman who had walked into that restaurant wasn't the same one who left. When I got home that night, the silence of the house felt like an open wound. Everything was exactly as I'd left it that morning, the folded blanket on the couch, the mug on the counter, the faint scent of the perfume I used to wear when I still believed in being loved. But something had shifted. The walls felt emptier, the air colder. I walked through the hallway slowly, my heels echoing softly on the wooden floor. I passed the framed photographs that once told a story of happiness. Our wedding day, our first house, a trip to the coast where he'd held my hand and promised forever. The faces in those pictures felt like strangers now. I paused in front of one photo, the two of us laughing, his arms wrapped around me, as if the world could never touch us. I touched the glass with my fingertips and whispered, "You liar." Then I turned it face down. The quiet was suffocating. I kicked off my shoes, walked into the kitchen, and poured myself another glass of wine. the same kind he liked, a bitter irony that made me smile through the ache. I didn't cry. Not yet. The tears were waiting somewhere deep behind the walls I'd built just to survive the last few hours. But my mind wouldn't stop. It replayed every word, every laugh, every moment when I'd thought he was mine. I thought about how he used to text me during lunch breaks, how he'd tell me I was the best thing that ever happened to him. And then I thought about Clara, about how easily she had stepped into the same sentences I once believed were mine. That's what betrayal does. It doesn't kill you right away. It makes you live long enough to feel every cut it leaves behind. Around midnight, I found myself in our bedroom. My bedroom now, though it didn't feel like mine yet. The bed looked too big. His pillow still carried the faint scent of his cologne. I picked it up, pressed it to my face, and for a moment I hated myself for missing him, for missing the illusion. I sat down on the edge of the bed, clutching that pillow like it could give me answers. My mind started drifting back to all the signs I'd ignored. The late nights, the quiet phone calls in the hallway, the way he'd pull away slightly when I hugged him. Love, I realized, isn't blind. It's willfully ignorant. You see the cracks, you just choose to paint over them because the truth costs too much. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker in the distance, wondering how long he had been lying to me, wondering how long I had been lying to myself. When dawn broke, the world outside looked the same, as if nothing had happened. The sun still rose, the birds still sang, and life kept moving cruelly indifferent to the mess inside my heart. I showered, dressed, and made coffee. Every action felt mechanical, robotic. When I looked at my reflection in the kitchen window, I saw a woman I barely recognized, eyes swollen from exhaustion but burning with quiet fire. The kind of fire that doesn't destroy, it purifies. By the time he came home the next morning, I was sitting at the table with a folder full of papers and a calm I didn't know I was capable of. He looked surprised to see me awake. His tie was gone, his shirt half untucked, and he smelled faintly of cheap perfume. I didn't need to ask where he'd been. The truth clung to him like smoke. "Good morning," I said evenly. He froze in the doorway. "We need to talk," he muttered. I smiled faintly. "Oh, we will." He sat across from me, avoiding my eyes. "Listen, about last night." "You mean your dinner date?" I interrupted softly. He looked up, startled. "Yes," I said, leaning forward. "The one I sat next to. The one you didn't have the courage to cancel." He exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "It's not what it looked like." I laughed, a quiet, humorless sound. "You really need to retire that line, Adam. It's become your favorite script." He sighed. "It was a mistake. I don't know what I was thinking. Things between us have been hard lately." "Stop." My voice was calm but sharp. "Don't you dare blame the cracks in our marriage for the hole you dug yourself into. You didn't trip into her bed, Adam. You built it." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I spent last night thinking about what kind of woman I wanted to be. The one who begs, or the one who walks away with her dignity." He frowned. "So what? You're just leaving." I smiled softly. "I'm not leaving. You are." His eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me." I reached for the folder on the table and slid it toward him. Inside were divorce papers, crisp, unblemished, and ready for his signature. He stared at them in disbelief. "I prepared them weeks ago," I said quietly. Not because I knew, but because I felt it. A woman always knows when her heart is being replaced. For the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. "You don't mean this." "Oh, I do," I said. "You should have thought about that before you made your reservations." He tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. The warmth between us had died long ago. All that remained was the memory of what used to be love. "I'll give you time to pack your things," I said, standing up. "You can leave tonight. I don't want another word, another apology, another excuse." He looked like a man unraveling. His lips trembled, his hands shook. But I didn't care. Not anymore. I turned to walk away, but then paused. "You know," I said softly, "I used to think betrayal was the worst thing you could do to someone. But I was wrong. The worst thing is pretending to love them, while slowly killing the parts of them that believed in it." He didn't respond. I left the kitchen and went upstairs, closing the bedroom door behind me. For the first time in days, I let myself cry, not because I missed him, but because I was finally letting go of everything that had kept me small. When I finished, I walked to the balcony feeling the morning breeze brush against my skin. The world looked clearer, somehow sharper, painful, yes, but honest. Full. I thought about how I had been waiting for him to come home and tell me the truth, how I had clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, love could still fix what was broken. But love doesn't fix lies, it exposes them. I whispered into the wind, "Goodbye, Adam." And just like that, it was over. What surprised me most wasn't the sadness, it was the peace, the quiet relief of finally knowing that I had survived the worst, that I could rebuild, that I could love myself again without needing his permission. That afternoon, I packed his things neatly into boxes and left them by the door. I didn't throw them, I didn't burn them. I simply ended it with grace, the one thing he could never take from me. As the sun set, the living room filled with a golden glow. For the first time in months, I felt something warm bloom inside me. Freedom, maybe, or forgiveness, not for him but for myself. That night I sat on the balcony with a blanket wrapped around me and a cup of tea in my hands. The air was cool, soft, and almost gentle, like the world was trying to apologize for the storm it had just put me through. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the old wall clock in the living room. Time felt different now, slower, heavier. Every second carried the weight of the life I was leaving behind, but also the faint promise of something new, something real. When I looked out at the city, I thought about how many other women must be doing the same thing that night, sitting alone, nursing a heartbreak. They didn't deserve learning how to breathe again after being betrayed. It made me feel less lonely somehow, like pain was a language we all secretly understood. My phone buzzed once. Then again, I didn't need to look. I knew who it was. After a long pause, I picked it up. His name appeared on the screen. Adam. Please, can we talk? I need to explain. Adam. It's not what you think. She doesn't mean anything to me. Adam. Please answer me. I can't lose you. I stared at the words for a long time, then locked the phone and set it down beside me. The truth was, he had already lost me, he just didn't know it yet. Oh. I sipped my tea and whispered, "You can't lose what you've already thrown away." For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to respond. There was no anger, no satisfaction, just peace. He wanted me to fight, to scream, to give him the closure he thought he deserved, but silence was the only answer left. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of his car in the driveway. My heart didn't race this time. It stayed calm, steady, certain. He knocked on the door softly, once, twice, then again. I didn't move. "Please," he called out. His voice was muffled through the wood. "Just talk to me." I stayed where I was, staring at the quiet street beyond the balcony railing. The stars were faint, hidden behind clouds, but they were still there, the way hope always hides in the distance, waiting to return. The knocking stopped after a while. Then came the sound of him shuffling away, muttering something I couldn't make out. A car door slammed and then the engine started. And just like that, he was gone. When I finally went to bed, I lay on my side of the mattress, the one that still carried the faint scent of my lavender body lotion. I let the empty space beside me stay untouched. It didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt like mine. In the days that followed, I rebuilt my world one small act at a time. I started with the house. I repainted the bedroom walls from soft beige to pale blue, a color that reminded me of the ocean I used to dream about visiting. I replaced the framed wedding photos with pictures of places I wanted to see, people who made me laugh, and moments that didn't depend on anyone else. Then I started walking every morning. At first, just around the block, slow, quiet steps, trying to find rhythm again. But with each sunrise, I went a little farther. The air felt cleaner, the world lighter. One morning, an elderly woman who lived 3 houses down waved at me. I smiled back, and for some reason that small gesture made my eyes sting with tears, because I realized that was the first genuine smile I'd given anyone in months. I began seeing people again, old friends I had drifted away from during my marriage. They welcomed me back with open arms, no questions asked. It was strange how they didn't need explanations, they just knew. One of them, a woman named Rachel, hugged me tight one afternoon and whispered, "You didn't deserve what he did to you." I smiled and said maybe not, but maybe I needed it to remember who I am. Healing wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was quiet, almost invisible at first, like soft rain that slowly washes away the dirt after a storm. Every night, I wrote in a journal, something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. I poured everything out: the anger, the grief, the guilt, the strange relief. I wrote until my hand ached and my eyes burned, but when I closed the notebook, I always felt a little lighter. One evening, about 2 weeks after I'd told him to leave, I came home from work and found a letter in the mailbox. No return address, but I didn't need one. I recognized his handwriting immediately. I stood in the doorway for a long time, the envelope trembling in my hands. Part of me wanted to throw it away. The other part, the curious, foolish part, wanted to know what words he could possibly use now to rewrite what he'd done. In the end, I opened it. The letter was short, simple, almost cowardly in its neatness. I don't know how to undo the damage I caused. I keep seeing your face at the restaurant and it haunts me. I wish I could go back, but I can't. I hope one day you'll forgive me, not for me, but for yourself. Because you deserve peace. I read it once, twice, and then folded it back neatly. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. I just felt free. Because forgiveness, I realized, wasn't for him, it was for me. That night I burned the letter in the kitchen sink. I watched the flames eat away at the paper until it turned to ash. And as the smoke curled upward, I whispered, I forgive you, but I'll never forget. The next morning, I booked a weekend trip to the coast, the same place we had gone years ago when things still felt magical. This time, I went alone. The sea air was sharp, clean, alive. I walked along the shore barefoot, the sand cold beneath my feet. The waves crashed and hissed like they were washing something away. The bitterness, the sorrow, the ghosts of love that had long since died. I stopped near the water and closed my eyes. The sound of the ocean surrounded me, endless and pure. For the first time in months, I didn't feel broken, I felt whole. I whispered to the wind, thank you for leaving me. You freed me when I was too afraid to free myself. As the tide rolled in, it brushed against my ankles, cool and soft like forgiveness itself. And I smiled, not the smile of a woman trying to look strong, but the quiet, genuine smile of someone who finally is. I stood there for a long time, letting the waves lap against my feet until they numbed from the cold. It wasn't sadness I felt anymore, it was clarity. The kind that only comes when you've survived something that should have destroyed you, and instead it turned you into someone new. When I opened my eyes, the horizon stretched endlessly before me, a blur of silver and blue, infinite and forgiving. For the first time, I didn't see the past when I looked out at the water. I saw possibility. That evening, I sat at a seaside cafe watching the sun melt into the ocean. The sky turned 1,000 shades of gold and pink, and I thought about how endings aren't always tragedies. Sometimes they're quiet beginnings dressed as heartbreak. I took out my phone and scrolled through old photos, the ones I'd been too afraid to delete. Pictures of us smiling, laughing, pretending everything was fine. I stared at one for a long time, our last anniversary dinner. He had his arm around me, smiling at the camera, but I could see it now, the emptiness behind his eyes, the distance in his body language. It wasn't love that kept us together that night, it was habit, and I had mistaken that for devotion. With a deep breath, I began deleting them one by one. Each swipe felt like peeling off a layer of pain I didn't need to carry anymore. When I was done, I turned off the phone and sat there just listening to the waves, to the faint chatter of strangers, to the heartbeat of a world that kept going no matter who stayed or left. And in that quiet moment, something inside me whispered, you're finally free. I didn't need closure from him. I didn't need an apology or revenge or even validation. What I needed was myself, and I had her again. The next morning, I woke early and walked along the beach before sunrise. The sky was pale gray, the world still half asleep. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of salt and new beginnings. I bent down and picked up a small seashell, smooth, perfect, unbroken. I held it to my ear, listening to the faint echo inside, and smiled. There was a strange poetry in it, how something so small could hold the sound of something as vast as the ocean. That's what healing felt like, learning how to hold something enormous inside something fragile. When I returned home a few days later, the house didn't feel heavy anymore. The ghosts were still there, faint echoes of laughter, the smell of him in certain corners, but they no longer haunted me. They simply existed like old memories I could acknowledge without reliving. I rearranged the furniture, opened the curtains wider, let sunlight flood in. For the first time, I filled the space with music again, the same songs I used to love before my life had been reduced to silence. As the melody drifted through the rooms, I danced, alone barefoot, laughing softly at the absurdity of it all, how something so devastating had somehow brought me here to this quiet joy. Healing, I realized, isn't about forgetting what broke you. It's about remembering who you were before the pain and deciding she's worth coming back for. Weeks turned into months. The divorce finalized quietly without drama. He tried to reach out once or twice, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence between us said everything that words never could. I started traveling short trips at first, weekend getaways, places I'd always wanted to visit but never did because we didn't have time. Now it was just me, and that was enough. I hiked mountains, read books on trains, met people who didn't know my story, and for the first time that felt liberating. I didn't have to explain my past to anyone, I could just be. One afternoon, months later, I found myself sitting at a cafe by another river, not the one where everything fell apart, but one in a different city under a different kind of light. I was journaling again the way I did that first week after he left. A man at the next table smiled at me. Not the intrusive kind of smile, just a quiet kind one. I smiled back politely and went back to my writing. I didn't feel the need to flirt. I didn't feel the need to rush. There was no longing in me anymore, only peace. Because I had learned something sacred, love doesn't have to come from someone else to feel whole. It can come from the way you treat yourself when no one's watching. That night, as I walked home under the city lights, I thought about the version of me who once cried on that kitchen floor, reading those messages, thinking her world had ended. I wanted to reach through time and tell her it didn't end there. It was just beginning. Sometimes the worst thing someone does to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you, because it forces you to rise, to rebuild, to find the parts of yourself you'd buried under compromise. And that's what I had done. When I reached my apartment door, I paused before unlocking it and whispered to myself, "Welcome home." Not the home I'd built with him, but the one I was still building inside myself, piece by piece, with forgiveness and courage and quiet grace. I made tea, sat by the window, and watched the world go on, traffic lights changing, people laughing in the street below, the sky slowly darkening into stars. And I smiled again. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was still here, still standing, still capable of love, even if that love was just for me. Before bed, I opened my journal and wrote one last line for the night. I didn't lose him. I lost the version of myself who accepted less than she deserved. Then I closed the book, turned off the light, and let the quiet wrap around me like a promise that life, no matter how broken it gets, always finds a way to start over.